People in Ontario live on the shores of some of the most magnificent bodies of water in the world, but many of us know surprisingly little about them. A new documentary series that has its world broadcast premiere tonight on TVO offers some remedy to that. It's called Great Lakes Untamed, and we're joined now by two of the filmmakers. In Winnipeg, Manitoba, Merritt Jensen-Carr, president and executive producer at Merritt Motion Pictures, and in the nation's capital, Ted Oakes, executive producer and owner and managing director of Oak Island Films Limited. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Thank you.
All right, so for 13,000 years, the Great Lakes have been home to 1 million creatures and supplied an economic lifeline for two nations. Let's take a look at a short clip from the trailer for the Great Lakes Untamed documentary.
The Great Lakes aren't just enormous. They're ever-changing, unstoppable. These are the greatest lakes on Earth.
All right, Ted, I'm going to come to you. You'll learn a lot watching this documentary, and I want to know, what are some gaps you're trying to fill in terms of showcasing not only the beauty, but the life and stories of the Great Lakes?
I guess, Jan, the main thing is that no one has done a landmark natural history TV series about the Great Lakes watershed. We see these types of films about the Serengeti or the Amazon or other parts of the world, but we haven't seen them, this type of three-part, high-budget natural history documentary about this watershed and about the place where we live. So that's, I think that's what's special about it.
Mayor, I want to come to you. In what ways do you see this project making an impact, both locally but also internationally?
Well, I think for me, it was a huge opportunity to be able to make a series like this with Ted and to bring all of his BBC natural history filmmaking experience to Canada. But also, we were able to involve broadcasters from around the world. And our goal is to put the Great Lakes on the map internationally in a way that the Amazon is on the map and bring awareness to the fact that this body of water is incredibly important at this period of time.
I want to ask you as well, in terms of time, a lot of people, it's a 3-hour documentary series here, but there's a lot of time and hours that go into making something like this. And I'm just curious, Mary, how much time did go into this?
Well, 3 years, but 3 years from development. TVO was fantastic. They were the first ones to get on board and help us develop it. But Ted has been dreaming about making this project for a much longer time, as he would tell you.
Ted, let's jump into that. Let's talk about some of the inspirations there. You talked about, of course, there have been all these documentaries about other sort of great regions, but what was it about the Great Lakes? What inspired really the start of it all?
I grew up in Ontario, and when I was a little boy, everybody my age was rolled out in school to watch a film called Paddle to the Sea. And Paddle to the Sea was made by an Ottawa-based filmmaker who was nominated for an Oscar for that film. And it was all about the story of a little indigenous canoe going through from Lake Superior all the way out to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And in 2014, I happened to be at a talk just north of Ottawa here, and the canoe was sitting in a display case, sort of on the side, almost ignored. And I remembered the NFB film Paddle to the Sea from the early 70s and thought it was time to do something spectacular about the Great Lakes. So that's what we've tried to achieve.
Now, Merritt had mentioned, that the Great Lakes have been compared to the Amazon. Ted, I'm curious, how are the ecosystems similar?
I've spent quite a bit of time in the Amazon and probably about a quarter of my life in the Great Lakes watershed, both as a biologist and as a filmmaker. They're similar in a lot of different ways. They're vast areas of forest, wetland, with a diversity of habitats and animals. There are diversity of peoples. And they've also, both the Amazon has really shaped the consciousness of Brazil, and the Great Lakes has really formed Canadians. Remember, historically, the Great Lakes were the path for the settlers to come from Europe into the interior. and also home to many First Nations people in both Canada and the States. And so both countries have been shaped by these watersheds, both politically, historically, economically. And the missing piece for the Great Lakes is that people haven't really appreciated the nature of the watershed, the nature that we have here.
Now, Mayor, we know Indigenous groups in the Amazon have been fighting to conserve the rainforest and the resources there. I'm curious, how did you shed light on the importance of Indigenous knowledge in this particular project?
We were fortunate very early on to bring on Royal Canadian Geographic Society and Swim Drink Fish as partners. And RBC has come on board and funded a very large impact campaign. So the entire project is over $5 million if you include the film series and the education campaign. It's the education campaign has incorporated indigenous. I mean, Ted has had this idea, which I think is really important, that the Indigenous, that there are no borders. You know, and the role that Indigenous people have played protecting the Great Lakes and the knowledge of the Great Lakes hasn't been incorporated into our knowledge in the way that it needs to be. And so what we've done with this impact and education campaign is we've incorporated that knowledge. Also, in the making of the series, we've involved Indigenous scientists and Indigenous researchers to the extent that we could.
Ted, if the Amazon rainforest is the lungs of the earth, what are the Great Lakes to Canada and to the world?
Well, the 5 Great Lakes themselves have 20% of the world's fresh water, surface fresh water. This is water that isn't frozen in the Arctic or Antarctic. And if you include the St. Lawrence River watershed, which is the only river that drains the 5 Great Lakes, then we're looking at almost a quarter of the world's fresh water. On a planet that's short of fresh water, these lakes have never, and this watershed's never been more important. It is of global significance. It's as important as the Amazon to planet Earth. It's as important as the Amazon to all people of the Earth.
But also, it's 90% of the U.S.'s source of fresh water, right, Ted?
That's right, and there isn't really, there's barely a drop of water west of the Mississippi in the U.S. If you zoom in to the Great Lakes watershed, as you get inland away from the 5 lakes, you see thousands and thousands and thousands of smaller lakes. But if you zoom in west of the Mississippi into the United States, you see almost no water, almost no lakes. So there's a big looming water crisis in the U.S., and the Great Lakes have never, and protecting the Great Lakes has never been more important.
All right, I want to jump into some of the challenges. That was a part of, the conversation that you were covering in the documentary. Ted, how is climate change already affecting the Great Lakes ecosystems and the species?
Well, we see this with some of the. We see this in some of the scenes within the TV series. In one of the episodes is about how the watershed was formed by the powers of ice and snow, and within that, there's a story of Indigenous people in the U.S., the Chippewa, on the American side of Lake Superior, who are funding research into ticks that infest moose. And what's happened on the U.S. side of the Great Lakes is moose have almost gone extinct. There's only about 2,000 to 4,000 moose on the U.S. side of the Great Lakes. This is what's coming to Canada. Because with warmer winters, they get ticks, which they call winter ticks, which they try to rub off, which cause various problems for them. But one is they lose their insulation of their fur. And so moose are likely to go extinct on the Canadian side, in addition to on the U.S. side, if we don't combat climate change. And of course, moose is a wonderful animal. I've seen them here north of Ottawa, where I am now, and we wouldn't be Canadians if we didn't have moose, or we wouldn't be Ontarians if we didn't have moose. So that's just one example.
Merritt, I'll let you chime in there as well.
Well, I'd just like to reframe it a little bit, because we do talk a little bit about some of the challenges, but our goal was to celebrate that watershed, that entire watershed, and all of the wildlife that exists there and depends on it. That's a lot of which is thriving. And I think that the public perception is that, that the Great Lakes, to a great extent, are dead, or certainly, in dire straits. But in fact, and they are, I think, a lot of people are completely unaware of the abundance of wildlife that exists there, the diversity of wildlife that exists there, just how amazing it is, and how much is left there to protect, and also how much success people are having with some of the conservation efforts that are already happening. So, so that I just wanted to kind of make sure that that people understood. That's the series. This isn't really primarily an environmental series. This is a nature series, which is celebrating the Great Lakes and all of the nature of the Great Lakes. And then in terms of challenges, I think in some ways the Great Lakes, absolutely, there are many challenges, but including making the series, which was a real challenge during COVID. But again, this series doesn't focus on the challenges. It focuses on the well.
We will get to some of the species that are thriving, but I do want to pick up on that note. In terms of the production side, when we talk about climate change, there are some beautiful scenes and shots that you guys have taken, and I think a lot of people don't really understand how powerful the Great Lakes can be. I want to get sort of a take, Merritt. How did these changes, when we talk about climate change, affect production on the documentary?
Well, it's becoming very, very hard to make natural history, because we used to be able to predict behavior and when behavior was happening. And we also used to be able to rely on the scientists that are studying that wildlife to help us know when we need to be into the field for, various kinds of, moments in that behavior. And now it's really difficult for anyone to predict. And so making this series, well, we had two challenges. One, because of COVID, a lot of scientists weren't in the field. And and we couldn't cross the border. And so our directors had to rely on American shooters, and they couldn't be in the field in the way that they would normally be. That was one really huge challenge. And then the other challenge is just that, we can expect that something's going to happen at a moment in time based on historic experience, but that's not reliable at all in the way that it used to be. And I think Ted could speak to that even more than I can. It's become a huge challenge, and that's not just for this show. That's been for the last, really probably the last 10 years, more and more the last 5 years.
All right, so as the world warms, lake effect blizzards will become more extreme. The southeastern shores of the Great Lakes will bear the brunt. But that is indeed good news for the Canada lynx, a master hunter in the deep snow. I want to actually show a clip of the Canada lynx hunting for a snowshoe hare. Have a look. Now, we don't want to give away too much, so you have to watch to see what happens there. But as you mentioned, that is just one example of a species that has rebounded and has started to sort of thrive. Another example, of course, is the beaver population that's increased along the Great Lake basins. Ted, in what ways are our watersheds in better shape than they were just a few decades ago?
Well, certainly the wildlife. When I was a kid here in Ottawa, there was heavy persecution of native wildlife. I remember, I grew up right in the city here. I remember going across to the neighbors, and he had 5 dead wolves in his garage, and he was just a civil servant. There was a bounty on wolves when I was a kid. Beaver populations were low. There was heavy fur trapping, sometimes just for a hobby. And so there's far less persecution of the big mammals. And that means that wildlife populations of many species, especially many of the carnivores, have have increased. And that's fabulous news. I mean, it was almost impossible to see a fisher. There's a mammal called a fisher that lives in the Great Lakes watershed. It hunts porcupines. And I'd never heard of anybody seeing a fisher when I was younger and when I was a biologist working for the Canadian Wildlife Service. But now people are seeing fisher all the time. Mountain lions are slowly reclaiming parts of Ontario. So many species are coming back that were formerly heavily persecuted, and that's a great thing. The Great Lakes watershed has almost the same diversity of large mammals as Yellowstone does, as some of the more famous places where people will go to see wildlife in North America. So it is our Amazon. It's a fabulous place.
I do want to follow up with you, Ted, on that. In terms of putting this documentary together, what was the process like in terms of figuring out what species you wanted to highlight, what species you wanted to, put some more attention to?
Yeah, I mean, we did about 6 months of intensive research before we started filming. Just really calling scientists, trying to find out where there were new stories, where there were the best stories. And we found some spectacular things. There's new research that flying squirrels are fluorescent and communicate through fluorescence. And you'll see that's completely new science. One of the handful of mammals on the planet that actually have bubblegum pink fur at night under certain types of lighting. We found a species of fish called the red-side dace that lives in the watershed of Toronto that is a specialist. It's the only fish in the world, as far as we can tell, that jumps out of the water to catch insects on the wing. So it's a specialist in feeding in the air. And we filmed that. We filmed a variety. We found wolves fishing in fresh water. They're the first wolves in the world that have been documented to be catching fish in fresh water. We know in BC that wolves will fish in the coastal tide pools, but these wolves are feeding in fresh water thousands of miles from the ocean. So we tried to concentrate on completely new stories that would captivate the audience.
And I think that really worked. I think in every part of that documentary, there are parts where it's mentioned by the narrator that this is the first time it's ever been captured on camera, and it's really fascinating. I think a lot of people will learn some stuff. Merritt, you had mentioned, one of your goals was to share good news about the Great Lakes, and I want to come back to that. Why is it important that Canadians know the progress that we've made on that front?
I think in order to engage people into feeling like action is possible, I think there's a real sense often that it's too late. And so I think it's really important for people to see that there's so much that's working, so many efforts that are happening, that are working and have been for a long time, and that we're seeing the success of that. And that the important thing right now is to just, expand that and increase that and make more things possible. But it's just, and then, a big part of everybody's goal is to try to make sure that people are kind of enjoying the lakes. There are lakes to enjoy, experience, get out there. And, we're really blessed to have that. And so, that is, I think, the other goal is just to help people realize there's so much there for them to experience. And not just people in Ontario, but also people in the world, because I don't think there's an awareness of the Great Lakes. And what we want to do is put the Great Lakes on the map in the same way that some of those other places, like Yellowstone, as Ted mentioned, are on the map as a place that's there, that's, where nature is thriving, and we should be part of it.
Now, Ted, you are a zoologist, and I want to talk a little bit about the scientists that were involved. You talked about the months of research, and Merritt's talked about the 3-year production time span here. You had scientists share their knowledge in wildlife, like the wolverine biologist, for example. Why is it important for people to know more about their work?
I mean, the biologists I was a biologist for 10 years, wildlife biologist. The biologists are unsung heroes. They're working in remote places, poorly funded, rarely heard from. And they have amazing stories to tell about the fellow creatures that inhabit this vast watershed. But without their research, we wouldn't really know about the wonders of the watershed. Imagine going into an art gallery and having all the paintings turned to face the wall. What a biologist does is turn that painting over so that and telling you the history of that painting. That's the equivalent of it. But in addition to the biologists, we had some of Canada's best cinematographers. We had Nick Deponcier, Jeff Morales, Hugo Kitching, some of the best cinematographers in North America, and a fantastic team that were working with the biologists to bring us these stories. And Merritt and I couldn't be more proud of the work that they did.
And we have a few minutes left, and I want to ask both of you. Merritt, I'll start with you. What do you hope the audience takes away from this project?
I hope that the audience comes away realizing that the Great Lakes are this enormous a gift to Canada, that they should be treasured, they should be experienced, and that they should be supported, and that people are aware of the fact that it's time right now to step up and make sure that happens, that they tell governments that they want to make sure that those lakes are properly protected and funded, and that they get out there and they enjoy them. I really want to make sure that this series kind of really inspires people to take that action and understand what they have left to protect.
All right, Ted, for people who want to get involved and learn more about the Great Lakes, why is this week super important?
This is the 50th anniversary of the U.S.-Canada Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, signed by Pierre Trudeau and Richard Nixon half a century ago. And there's a conference in Niagara Falls. The public are invited. You can register, go online and register, and tell politicians on both sides of the border what you want. But people need to engage in the Great Lakes publicly. It's not just the 5 lakes, it's the entire watershed. It's almost as wide as the Atlantic Ocean, from the western edge of Superior all the way to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. That is the watershed. And the people who have not been consulted about the stewardship of the Great Lakes are the Indigenous people. The many First Nations people were never party to the original agreement. And they have an important, crucial voice in this. So I really encourage people to join the Royal Canadian Geographic Society and Swim Drink Fish's monogamy campaign, which is really stewarded by First Nations people. And that's the thing that they can do the best. But as Mark Merritt said, just enjoy the watershed. Go swim, go drink the water, go fish where you can, and fight for clean water and fight for nature in the watershed. That's what people should do.
And we will leave it there. Ted, Merritt, thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.